Okay, we're going to pick up with part 2 of chapter 52. So, looking at seasons and how seasons are affected by our location around the sun and also the tilt of the earth in the specific locations around the sun. So, remember that the earth, our biosphere, is going to rotate around the sun. We also know that the earth spins, and each spin is a 24-hour cycle, and that's one day. So if you look at the direction of the red arrows, you can see how the year is going to move about. So if we start in December, December solstice, in this case, the southern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. December solstice would be December 21st. In the southern hemisphere, that would be summer because it's tilted towards the sun to a greater degree. So they have more heat, more light, longer days. The northern hemisphere is tilted away. So we have the shortest amount of daylight at this point. Then we move forward and we have the March equinox, which is March 20th. So you can see that at this point. So that would be spring in the northern hemisphere and fall in the southern hemisphere. Then we move to June. The June solstice is June 21st. In the northern hemisphere, that's the longest day. All days are 24 hours, but it has the most daylight. In the southern hemisphere, that would be the shortest day. So that would be winter. That's June 21st. And then we move forward into September. September 21st is the September equinox. Again, fall in the northern hemisphere and spring in the southern hemisphere. So these seasons, which all happen again because of the tilt of the earth in its rotation or orbit around the sun, are going to give us different length of days, as I mentioned, the amount of solar radiation or heat that is going to be released from the sun. So this is going to give us our seasons, and that's caused by the tilt of the Earth's axis as it is rotating around the sun. So again, one complete trip around the sun is 1 year. We also need to look at how bodies of water play an important role in influencing climate. So the ocean currents are going to be very important in influencing the climate of the land that is near it. The currents of water flowing toward the equator are carrying cold water from the poles, so from the North and South Pole, and the currents flowing away from the equator are going to be carrying the warm water towards the poles. So the air is going to be cooled or warmed by these currents before they pass over the land, which will then influence the weather that is felt on the land near those bodies of water. So you can see, again, largest of these currents in the oceans. You see the California current here. You see the Gulf Stream over here. So when we think about weather that we encounter in our neck of the woods in Ohio here, again, we have typically weather patterns coming from the west to the east. So we typically look to the west to see what's happening. But the Gulf Stream is very important in helping to maintain temperatures. You have the Humboldt current down in the South Pacific. You have your South Atlantic subtropical gyre, Indian Ocean. There's a circumpolar current, which means it's going around. And then you have a Labrador current up here as well. We talk a lot about the Gulf Stream in our neck of the woods because this is what seems to play a big role in our weather. Mountains are also really important in influencing climate. They influence the airflow over the land, which will affect the climate that is in the areas surrounding the mountains. So the warm air will cool as it rises up a mountain and releases moisture on the windward side. Then cool, dry air will absorb the moisture from the land as it descends, creating what's called a rain shadow on the leeward side. And I'll show you a picture of this. Mountains also do affect the amount of sunlight that reaches an area, which makes sense. So in the northern hemisphere, our south-facing slopes receive more sunlight than the north-facing slopes. And part of this not only is what kind of vegetation can grow in those areas, but also the temperature that we find in the mountainous ranges will change as well. So for every 1,000-meter increase in elevation, there's a temperature drop of approximately 6 degrees Celsius. And you can feel this if you're climbing or hiking in mountainous areas. You can be very warm at the bottom of the mountain. By the time you get to the top, you need quite a few layers because of all of the dramatic temperature differences that you can feel. So here again, you have ocean here, you have a mountain range here. So you see cool air will come off of the ocean, move up onto the mountain range. You can see that there will be a great amount of precipitation on this side, and then you have what's called a rain shadow on the leeward side of the mountains. So often you'll see lush and very fertile areas that we find on the side of the mountain that is towards the ocean. And then what's going to happen is that on the leeward side, we're going to have drier, more arid environments. Microclimates are very important as well. Microclimates are very fine localized patterns that we see in climate. They are going to be influenced by things like forests, the fact that trees in the forest can alter shade, evaporation patterns, changing wind patterns. So again, if we think of individual trees in forests allowing for small changes in areas. So think about areas, so say your backyard, you have an area where you have a nice shade tree, or an area in your backyard where there are no shade trees. Maybe the grass is really dry and dead, but underneath the shade trees, you have really lush grass. Maybe you have, again, certain types of flowers that can grow in those places that can't grow in areas outside of the shaded areas. So this would be what we would describe as microclimates. Again, we know that our environment will be characterized by differences in living and non-living factors. So abiotic factors, again, A means without. These are the non-living factors, things like temperature, light, water, nutrients that will affect or change our environments. Biotic factors, again, including other organisms that are part of your specific environment. So we know that those play a role in changing what's happening in those environments as well. We all know about global climate change, hopefully. We used to call this particularly global warming, but now we know we call it global climate change because it's not just warming that is happening, but it's a directional change to the global climate that lasts 3 decades or more. There have been many periods of climate change throughout the history of the Earth, of the biosphere. So some of them are naturally occurring. The one that we are in right now, this period of climate change, is caused by, or at least is exacerbated by the activities of Homo sapiens. So the things that we are doing are causing changes, particularly burning of our fossil fuels, which is releasing large amounts of carbon dioxide, methane that comes from burning, but also from animals that we farm and harvest for foods are a major problem for increasing global temperatures as well. A big factor also is deforestation. So deforestation, cutting down trees, tropical rainforests, mass areas of forest is a problem because trees are a really good place to sink the carbon. So they're a great way to take up carbon dioxide, which again is one of the major greenhouse gases. So because of this, because of these massive changes in climate, we see that we have very different wind and precipitation patterns. Global temperatures have shifted, and we have a very high amount of extreme weather events. extreme weather events have gone up dramatically. So we're still having hurricanes, but these hurricanes are not only stronger, but they're much, much bigger and wider because of all of the mass differences in the temperatures of the ocean. Okay, so let's talk about biomes. There are many different biomes that we'll talk about. Biomes are major life zones characterized by the vegetation type, which is a terrestrial biome, or the physical environment, which will be aquatic biomes that we'll talk about. So this is showing you different examples. So you can see that there are quite a few different biomes across the biosphere. So we'll talk about each of these. Tropical forests, savannas, deserts, chaparrals, temperate grasslands, temperate broadleaf forests, northern coniferous forests, tundras, mountains, and polar ice. So you can see all of these places. If you look at where we are, right here, temperate broadleaf forest is what we are right here, but we are close to the grassland area as well. And north of us in Canada, northern coniferous forests. So climate is a major factor determining the locations of these terrestrial biomes because it strongly influences the distribution of plants. And biomes are affected not just by the mean temperatures and precipitations in an area, but also by the pattern of temperature and precipitation through the year. So the way that we can look at this and we can examine this as scientists is by looking at climagraphs. So climagraphs are ways that we can plot or chart the annual mean, so mean meaning average, temperature and precipitation in a region. So this is showing you an example of a climograph here. So annual mean temperature, annual mean precipitation. Again, thinking of some different types of biomes. Temperate broadleaf, this again is us. So looking at temperature in Celsius, so mean average temperature, and mean precipitation in these locations as well. So tropical forests, temperate grasslands, deserts, again, you can see very low amounts of precipitation. And remember, deserts don't have to have warm temperatures, they can have colder temperatures as well. It's based on the amount of rainfall that they get, or not only rainfall, but snow, so precipitation. So some general features of terrestrial biomes. Terrestrial biomes, they're often named for their major physical or climatic factors in vegetation. They usually grade into each other, so that means that there are not sharp boundaries between them. It's not some dividing line where we say, now you are entering a savanna or a temperate grassland, right? Because they are fading from one into another area. So the area where they overlap, so the intergradation area is called an ecotone, and the ecotone area where there's an overlap between these terrestrial biomes can be very wide or very narrow, depending on the location on the Earth that you're looking at. Another thing that's really important in terrestrial biomes is vertical layering. So again, thinking about a forest, right? So your forest might have the upper canopy, so the really tall trees. There are some lower tree layers underneath that, shrubs and other shorter plants. There's a ground layer of herbaceous plants. You have your forest floor, and then there's the roots underneath that. So that's quite a few layers that we have. And the good thing about this layering of the vegetation is that this provides a lot of diverse habitats and locations for animals to live. So that's something that's really interesting, is that this allows for diversity in the insects, in the bacterial species, animals, all of these things have various locations that they can live within these forests, which have a lot of vertical layering. The species composition of each kind of biome varies, of course, from one location to another, and that has a lot to do with what's the amount of rainfall, what is the temperature that we find in these particular locations. And another interesting thing, if we think about this vertical layering, is that you can have some very different exposure to temperatures in the vertical layering as well. So think about things that are on the very top of the trees might be exposed to lots of sunlight. Things that are closer to the ground are not getting the same temperature that you're going to find at the top. So disturbances are also really important in terrestrial biomes. Disturbances are events that can be very large or small, but that have an effect on a community. So things like storms, so it could be hurricanes, tornadoes, thunderstorms, things like fires, or even human activity that can change a community. So if we think of areas like savannas, frequent fires are important because they kill woody plants, and they also help to maintain particular types of vegetation. Hurricanes, like I mentioned, can create large openings, tornadoes in forests that will allow for different species to grow. And what's interesting is that there are some biomes that actually thrive and do better if there are periodic disturbances. So there are some plant species that are really well adapted to grow quickly after a fire. Some species that don't even, the seed pods don't open until there's a frequent fire, which is interesting as well. So disturbances can be good or bad, depending upon the biome and the situation. So terrestrial biomes, we're going to talk about the individual characteristics of each one, but they can be characterized by their distribution across the planet. How much precipitation do they get? Is there precipitation, rain, or snow? What is the temperature? What's the variation of the temperature throughout the different seasons? What are the plants and what are the animals as well? So we'll pick up next with looking at all of the different biomes, both terrestrial and aquatic.